Yeah, so great to be here, and great to be back in the XML community, really. It's a place where I've spent quite a bit of this century, but my roots go back much further than this, into structured programming in the 70s, and spent a lot of time in OO and data modeling, teaching databases. So these influences all contribute to where I am. Now, a lot of my time is spent being working with a group, Bristol Tree Forum, who look after trees in Bristol, where I am a kind of a developer and a tree hugger. I only recently realized that tree hugging is not quite as cuddly a profession as I'd thought. These are the first tree huggers who were villagers in India defending their trees from being chopped down to make wood for a palace. Back in those days, you didn't get detention for hugging trees. These men and women all were beheaded as part of their process. It did win; they protected their trees, but my role is hopefully a little calmer than that. So today I'm going to talk about a voyage, really, through from a problem which arises in the field that I work in, which is about looking at planning applications and trying to see whether they're helpful or hindrance to biodiversity, through our attempt to try to handle this problem, reveal it, and then do some. I'll summarize a little bit about the general field here, which it feeds into, which is about algorithmic transparency. I'm sure you all recognize the first two lines. Anybody remember anybody know when they were written? I'll do 70. 50 years ago since Joni wrote those words, and it's still, of course, very true. And if it wasn't for groups like us, sure enough, cities would be turned into parking lots. So with biodiversity net gain, the intent is to develop planning laws so that instead of that kind of development, we increase the biodiversity. In planning law in the UK, this is going to be mandatory to increase it by 10%. The problem, however, is where that is. You could still be a parking lot in my hometown with trees in Wales. And when, trees don't grow instantly, but they are chopped down instantly. It's all promises, as it were. So the issue today is, for me, is how this was going to be measured, and moreover, how visible to the public those measurements were going to be. So the government have devised this thing called the BNG metric, biodiversity net gain metric. It attempts to divide a large development site into parcels of common habitat and condition. It then attempts to evaluate those parcels in terms of a common, to reduce that value to a common unit, which can then be traded into new development parcels of land, either on-site or off-site. The problem is that those rules for both assessing and trading those units is quite complex. When we looked into how this was being done, the government provide this tool for use by developers and by us or anybody. This tool is kind of frightening. It's frightening on two grounds. One is that there is no abstract definition of what these rules are, other than its implementation in a spreadsheet. I mean, this is quite common, I gather. I mean, because it's hard to state these things other than by an implementation. In this case, the implementation is an Excel spreadsheet. It's quite big. It's humongous. It's got 40 sheets, and if you try to understand how that's done in table terms, that's about 95 tables. Okay. Moreover, and this is kind of startling, this spreadsheet has been developed by end users. It's been developed by ecologists. They're all very clever chaps. In fact, much cleverer than I would be. I cannot understand how they actually managed to develop this thing because it is so complicated. So I asked them, I wonder if I could speak to your software architect because this is a complex thing. And she said, and the answer I got was, oh, it's not software development. We're just using an Excel package. And unfortunately, this is a common refrain in the database world. You give them a tool like this, and this is what happens. It's important here because this is the tool being used not in-house, but distributed to everybody to use, and will be part of legislation. So spreadsheets, well, we all love them and we all hate them. Over 1 billion people love them and use them regularly. However, we all know that they're pretty erroneous in many cases, hidden errors, which have had spectacular consequences in some cases. But there's also, of course, no separation of data and code. That makes testing pretty difficult because you can't substitute a new set of data into the same environment and see what its effect is. Lots of things. There's no abstraction. You might have a table with 1,000 rows in it, but the description, the definition of what that row does is unique to the row. It just happens, perhaps, to have the same formula copied, but there's no abstract definition of what that row does. However, prototyping is much easier. And indeed, what I'm working on here is effectively a prototype. I start from an example, in this case, this enormous spreadsheet, and try to figure out, well, how can I abstract from it? And of course, incomprehensible cell references. There are ways of doing this in Excel, but nobody uses it. All the cell references are, give me this sheet and these range of codes. And of course, because this is a product, lots of those cells are actually hidden. You can't even see them. And macros do hidden work as well. So this is a bit of Excel for you. A typical Excel. I mean, this is not the biggest. Two things. I spread it out like this. It's one line to there in Excel. This is this is okay. This is sort of referring to a table, some cells in another table. A couple of things that are interesting from a declarative point of view, however, is that the guts of it is this. That's the calculation that matters. The rest is all error handling, and of course the errors sometimes produce text. So this is a mixed result here. It's not a number. It's not text. It depends on how the processing has been done, and this fact that the core of it is the last thing mentioned is kind of a flaw in our programming languages. I think that what this could say is, well, this is what it is, except unless, why don't we focus? Why would we say that here's what should happen, but we don't do but in programming, and we perhaps ought to do but. From a point of view of trying to explain something, but would be unless would be quite handy. Other tables, other functions are cross-table functions here, and these are presenting me with a bit of a problem here. Clearly, they are properties of this table, the table on which they operate, but they operate at the class level and not at the moment they're sort of taken away and put into a summary, but they are associated with the thing they're a summary of, and I don't know quite how to handle that, to be honest. Oh, yeah. So what we'd like to be able to do is produce something which is both transparent, something where you can actually see what the formula are, see how those formula relate to the formal documentation, such as it is in the legislation. It's traceable. That also provides some guidance to the user, so they in the user interface can see what is supposed to happen in these cases. and we'd like it to be executable. You probably don't recognize him, but you know what he's famous for? CSP, anything else? Quicksort, yes. And a lot of his pupils too have become famous. Tony Hoare said this: there are two ways of constructing a software design. One way is to make it so simple there are no obvious deficiencies. The rest is what we normally do. And certainly, tracing through to see whether there are any errors in that spreadsheet, there are clearly no obvious deficiencies. So this is always our challenge, I think, both for us and for declarative is okay, provided it also is simple enough to be understandable. Just a couple of background. I won't go. Clearly, what's appropriate here. This is basically a database on a spreadsheet. This is really database. So it goes back to data modeling, where we had entities and attributes and relationships and diagrams. And I worked on this quite extensively in developing tools using XML and stuff to to teach this sort of stuff. But I also worked on UML and a company that I was involved in that developed Syntropy. The idea being that we can not only have the diagrams, but we would annotate those with enough information to tell us about the behavior of those objects, since the object model is much more complicated than our basic data model is. So the ideas of pre and post conditions and variants, etc. And unfortunately, XML and XQuery weren't around when we were doing this. So we had to invent algebraic formalisms, for which there was no implementation. And it was all kind of, the only implementer was in your head, and that didn't necessarily help. Now those algebraic notations exist in the existential operators in XQuery, and XQuery can do it. So this I'm sure Nico will recognize this sort of diagram. You all recognize where it comes from? It's GraphViz. So this is generated by GraphViz on the fly from the underlying database. I'll just depart, see if this is going to work. I click through to here. So we're now in the live app here. And so these tables, base tables, are the ones in gray. The ones with green are user input tables, where we would expect some calculations to appear that are motivated by user input. And the pink tables are summary tables, computed summary tables. The arrows are dependencies formed by analyzing the formula, which refer to tables. You'll see this is hierarchical because one of the restrictions on this model is that the entity dependencies are hierarchical. There are no cycles in here. Because this is live, we can also dive through to it. And so that's one of the summary tables. This is editable. This is the kind of thing we might want to do if we edit this and scroll down to this is the net gain target. Somebody set it too high here, so we might want to set this to 10. Nothing much changes here, but that has to ripple through to all of the places in that spreadsheet where that occurs. You can play with this because at the moment it's open and anybody can edit it and use that interface. The forms, they're all generated on the fly, and they're just a bit of JavaScript running the form. But the basic form is, of course, generated from the model. So here, it's a very simplistic model. Everything is in entities, sometimes having to be singleton entities. Computations are restricted to things that can be attached to attributes. No macros in here, and restricted restricted dependencies into this hierarchical order, and that each of the instances of an entity operate independently. This is too strong a restriction, in fact, and it's causing me problems. But that's the joy of this kind of work. It's kind of sometimes these things can be fixed. So I know I'll stuff another attribute onto my model. Sometimes that can't happen, and this is so it keeps me off the streets. So we use XQuery for specifying how values are computed, and invariance. The model is just a big XML document spanning all of the tables at once, so it's a bigger scope than what we would have in XML schema. But it also does things. It's kind of a muddle at the moment because it embodies both the existential characteristics of an entity and also its display characteristics to drive the UI. That's not very clever. Each table is a XML document using name tags. It's not one of these field name equals so-and-so stuff. And the whole thing, it runs on exist, as this presentation is doing, and with a bit of JavaScript at the back. So this is how we would write stuff in this model. This is the way in which we do a condition lookup. We established what our habitat is, and we want to know what conditions are allowable. In this case, this evaluation. So here, table is a macro which is replaced by a call to get all of the instances of a particular table. We filter it here for that row or rows which correspond to the habitat property in the instance we're looking at, and get the condition. In this case, the number of conditions can be multiple. You have a choice of how to rate your bit of trees or swamp or whatever, but those conditions will depend on, swamps are different from trees. This return is actually multi-valued, and therefore the UI needs to generate a selector for this, and in order to progress, for the user to progress. That horrendous thing here is focused on the calculation. This looks a little bit nicer. And the validation conditions are hived off into something, some precondition here, rather than being expressed in the core functionality. Fortunately, we don't have to worry too much about error handling, in a sense that if we try to execute this without things being of the right type, we get something we can trap in the error part. I should have mentioned that, of course, eval is used throughout this to actually eval these XQuery expressions on the fly. It's an essential component of this, so don't ever speak a bad word about eval basis. So this is the fairly check, and here's our bit of existential XQuery. So if some condition in the table satisfies this is the conditions in the set of habitat baselines, which is what the site looks like before you start, then if anyone satisfies the condition of the condition starts with fairly, then we get a warning. This is a kind of transliteration of what was done in the spreadsheet model, and of course I wouldn't do it that way really, but you have to make a slow progress from the original mess to something which is better structured, because if you do it all at once, things do become, but I don't know quite where to put that still. It's still, you know, there are several places it could go, and it's not really going in the right place. So there are quite a few problems in trying to do this, which have cropped up. Some I've solved, some I haven't. Multi-dimensional problem tables in Excel tend to be ones which have a single one main dimension row-wise, and other ones nested columns, which kind of makes sense when you look at them, but they're horrendous to try and stupid to try and process that way, because you're kind of processing heading stuff. So they get turned into multi-keyed rows. A lot of validation going on, but not really a lot of restriction, which is obviously better to restrict what the user can put in rather than try to check them afterwards. So they're getting that balance right. A lot of tables there, which are summary tables or pivot tables, a lot of stuff in there. And variance, I'd like to be able to do it properly in variance here. The habitat units is a function, complex function, but of the core thing, which is the area, and I'd like to be able to invert that. So, you know, you can put in a number of habitat units and compute what area you should be trying to plant. The core is, I'll skip through this, but the core of this of a spreadsheet is its ability to do to sequence the evaluation of cell formula in a way which makes sense. It's not obvious how to do this, and in fact, the first spreadsheet, the most popular one, VisiCalc, actually did it repetitively, top down, left to right, and only later, in fact, rather, I should say, only earlier did they come up with the idea of doing this. By computing the dependency graph. I'm sort of somewhere in the middle of that at the moment. We compute the dependencies either of entities upon entities or attributes upon attributes within an instance, and then topologically sort that to get the computations done in the right order. Funny story about that. The expression of topological sorting in XQuery is just it's a nice expression of it. I don't know whether it's a very efficient way of doing it, but this is a lovely use of XQuery. When I came to write this code, I kind of thought this is an ideal opportunity to use ChatGTP, because I can't quite remember. You know, somebody must have written this in XQuery. So I asked ChatGTP, could you get me a topological sort in XQuery? And it came after a bit of dialogue with it. It came back with stuff which looked like XQuery, and might perhaps on the surface have been a topological sort. Nothing of the kind, of course. So I resorted to having to go back and use Google search. God, remember that? So I put in topological sort XQuery, and the first hit that came back was, lo and behold, to the wiki book that I had started, that Dan McCreary and I had started, and there was a perfect algorithm written by me. 15 years earlier. Never forgot about it. I don't know where I got it from. I can't have invented. I mean, it must have come from somebody unattributed, I'm afraid. Interesting, though, that ChatGTP didn't actually manage to ingest the wiki book. I don't know whether. Anyway, so there's lots to do. I've only a third of the quote, half a way through. I mean, I've done the easy bits of this enormous stuff, and I've still got the difficult bits to try to fit in to some sort of modeling here. It needs to be tried on other things, and there's another one in there where we've done tree surveys. The UI is very simplistic. Of course, recalc is slow, and it would be nice to be able to look at proper model-driven development from this thing by compiling XQuery, say, out of this description, rather than having to with things done in the right order with named fields. There's a lot of / name equals, name dot equals, etc. to access this data, which is pretty nasty. And a minor appeal, I can't find anything to really print XQuery code, and that's useful because part of the interface allows you to pop up the code that's operating. At core, this is about algorithmic transparency. It's about the ability of the public to know what is going on in their name. Of course, the big noise is about AI, and we've been having a big conference, big summit, haven't we, in London, pretending London's a center of the world again. That's where, that really is a transparency problem. But so are these things, because these things affect people's lives in just the same way that, a benefit decision done by AI does. They affect things rather more kind of secretly. And I think we have a right to know about what's happening in our name. These affect a lot of people. The UK have been world leaders in this. They've developed this extremely well done standard for a register of algorithms used in government. 2 years ago, a big party worked on it. As of now, it contains 6 entries. They look, by the date on them, as if they were done as part of the test data. That's probably a bit unfair, but it's not used at all. So finally, we're in an age of climate change. It's real. We, the public, are struggling with developers, and we would like to be able to see what's going on, see what the rules are, see open data and transparent algorithms are a public right, and declarative, perhaps in this sense, might have a role in that. So it's gone off the top here. I ended up with a bit of Joni as well. Curiously, this is they took all the trees, put them in a tree museum. Hopefully that won't happen in Amsterdam with your wonderful elms. You've got elms, we've got Dutch elm disease. I don't know how that happened. And no elms, but here we are. Let's keep it that way. Anybody know where that was actually taken? It's outside the Rijksmuseum, so it's quite appropriate. There's no room in there for trees. But... Okay, thank you very much.
Anyone with a question? Ken.
Once you've modeled all this, are the users not going to just continue using their spreadsheets?
Well, this is a tool to be used by developers, and other consultancies are kind of developing their own versions of it as well. How it's aligned with the standard, I don't know. The problem is people want to integrate this into other things. It doesn't necessarily stand alone. So
integrate what?
Integrate this calculation.
Okay.
Yeah, it's only part, in a sense, of the whole development framework, after all, and people will want to integrate that, even if it's only an exposure of what those rules are doing. I think it has value.
Oh, I'm not questioning the value.
No.
But you're going to end up with a model, and it's going to be declarative, and it's going to say how these things relate.
Yes.
Can you leverage that?
Can I leverage the British government?
No.
I can't. No.
Can you leverage the model in a way that?
No, I mean, in a way, this is futile work. It's because I'm never going to change the track of DEFRA and Natural England and convinced them that the way to do this is with declarative programming in XML language. But you know, what else can you do? You can only, you know, push forward these ideas and hope that someone's listening somewhere.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.